If they want to roll dice for, 5 or 10 minutes to see how many mooks they kill, great.
I mainline them, like heroin.
I duck under his arm and I punch him in the ribs. Failure should always be an option.
It was literally like, okay, there's this space here, and you're going to travel to this space over here. What happens in between?
This is not the day to tell me about your character. This is going to be a discussion. It is not going to be just us talking to you for an hour about what is good GMing, what makes a good GM better, and trying to solve any problems that you guys may have. My name is Ben Mandall. This is Jeff Fasenfest. We've been doing this for a couple of years at a bunch of different conventions, and we kind of like RPGs a tiny little bit like most of you. And by tiny little bit, I mean I mainline them, like heroin. Occasionally I mainline RPGs ground up in heroin. No, that sounds a little too bad.
Yeah.
You put the FU in fun?
Sure, we'll go with that one. So, the way we'd like to do this today, we're each going to throw out a brief idea just to sort of chum the water as it was. And then we're going to open it up to you guys. Most of what we're going to talk about is your questions, your thoughts, your ideas. If you have a problem that your gaming group is currently dealing with, we'd love to see what we can do to help. If you have an idea that you've always wanted a little feedback on for how to make your RPG better, or something that you could change that would really improve the gaming experience, let's talk about it. Only ground rule. This is not the day to tell me about your character. No character stories. If you need to mention very briefly, my gaming group met, a thing happened, okay, totally cool, but we're not going to get into, then this long story happened to my 12th level paladin, and this is why he's awesome, and eventually we'll come back to the point of, how do you send out a good invitation to a gaming group? No, we're not doing that. Beyond that, though, whatever questions you have, we're happy to entertain. So Jeff, what was the one idea you would like to throw out for consideration by these good folks today?
The one idea I would like to throw out for consideration is the number one thing that you can always do better within a gaming group. And that one thing is communicate. You will find every gaming group that you get into, you run into troubles, you're going to have disagreements, you're going to have players that want to do different things, you're going to have players who aren't interested in following the line that you've set up for where your story is going to go. And the biggest thing that I see new GMs fail to do is communicate with their players. They don't take the time either outside of the confines of the game and the rules to talk to their players and find out what their players want to do, or they don't take the time within the confines of the rules to give their players options. So if you find yourself running into any of the troubles that you can run into when you're running a game, the biggest thing I can say, and usually where I will find something that can be improved upon, is communication. Something broke down in communication between the GM and the players, and that's where we want to focus to find solutions for the things you're experiencing.
Whereas, I feel I now have to say something that sounds less nice, because, oh dear God, that was so wise and enlightened. Stereotypes are awesome! Alright, by that, what I mean is we're not going to run an RPG where the greedy Jewish banker is secretly running Hollywood and your Shadowrunners need to kill him. I instead mean useful stereotypes, which exist for a reason. You only get to game for a few hours per session. Maybe you're lucky enough that this happens every week. Maybe it's a once a month or even once every couple of months affair, depending on how busy your life is. A lot of people don't want to overuse stereotypes, such as the old mage or the village under attack, because, well, they're cliche, and I don't want to be cliche. But remember, your players have had hundreds, if not thousands of hours to consume TV, movies, internet, and books. They've only had a couple of hours to consume your campaign session. So even if you're a group that maybe met for 50 hours last year, that's still nothing compared to the movies, TV, etc. that they've experienced for the last few decades of their life. So even if it seems cliche to have the wise old mentor, the village under siege, the sultry temptress, or any of these other archetypes, it's okay to fit in that stereotype right now, because for the next 3 hours, sure, there may be 1,000 stories about the village under siege by a horde of zombies. But how many times have your players actually encountered that trope? If the answer is, well, never, then what does it matter if that story sounds cliche? Throw it out there and let them enjoy holding up that trope for the next couple of hours. So, we can continue rambling on specific topics if you'd like. I love talking about the social contract at the gaming table. But before I put you all to sleep by blathering on, are there any people here who have specific questions, issues, concerns, or whatnot that they would like to open up for discussion today? Sir, what have you got?
What do you think is the future of this hobby? The future of our community?
Ask us a real easy one, thank you. Okay, I can start, or you can, Jeff?
How do you see the next 5 years of this business going?
Right now, we appear to be living in a renaissance. I don't know if anyone here has backed Kickstarter or Indiegogo campaigns. If you have, then you've definitely seen it. If you haven't, I absolutely urge you to go on Kickstarter.com and take a look. Crowdfunding has allowed many small RPG publishers to publish material that they could not otherwise afford to create. Additionally, sites such as drivethrurpg.com allow for cheaper distribution of RPGs than perhaps has ever existed before, other than handing a pile of printed pages to your buddy. So the accessibility has risen tremendously, and I don't think we're going to see that change. If anything, we're going to see it grow. Recently, with 5th edition, Wizards of the Coast created what's called the GM's Guild, where players may submit their original content for sale at whatever price they choose, splitting it 50-50 with Wizards of the Coast. This is giving a lot of traffic to a lot of new authors. Mind you, the quality of the product varies greatly, but if you're going to spend $1 on a gaming file, I'm willing to try a lot of new authors for $1. And for $1, I'm not expecting, what I'm expecting for, say, that $50 hardbound supplement. In addition, because print-on-demand services have become much cheaper, we're also starting to see quirky niche RPGs that we might not have seen a few years ago. As I completely space on the name of the one I'm thinking of. Monster Hearts, actually. It's a very interesting one. There's a system called the Apocalypse Engine that recently became open source by Vincent Baker, its creator. So people are using this rules framework to make all kinds of games. And one person said, you know what I want? I want a supernatural teenage drama RPG specifically designed to wrestle with issues of identity, sexuality, orientation, and such as a high school drama, but with werewolves and vampires. And it could be Twilight, but I'd argue it's better. And that's how Monster Hearts got created. This is a niche that he can fill. Actually, no, sorry, the author is a she. That she can fill that may not have been funded 10 or 20 years ago. As for the growth of the hobby, speaking from just several months ago, there is a charter school system here in the Valley called Basis. I was volunteering at Basis Awatuki to run Dungeons & Dragons demos. And what I loved the most seeing there is that when kids signed up for the game, just as many girls signed up as boys of every color, because these are, in this case it was 4th through 8th graders. So yes, they're definitely being acculturated into society, gender roles and all that, but these 4th through 6th graders mostly, they didn't care. It was a game, it's fun, let's play. And I had just as many girls playing as boys, being just as horrifically violent and killing as many of my NPCs and derailing my plot just as badly. So what I'm hoping we might see, not only in the next few generations of gamers, is as many people enter our hobby as leave, but that it will continue being slowly more and more gender integrated. Sir, you had something you wanted to add?
To add to that particular piece, I'm a teacher, a 6th grade teacher. We've actually used gamification as part of my teaching style, so we actually use that. And you're right, the girls, and sometimes the girls are more so than the boys. My major thing is the use of terrain, props, do you find it to be better? Do you find it to be?
Before we get into a separate question, I just want to say, Jeff, did you have stuff you'd like to add about our hobby? And then we'll come back to
I
it.
had just one small thing to add on to the great stuff that Ben provided, and that's don't be afraid to use technology. We're at a point where there has been a huge spurt in the technology available to assist with running games and playing games. Things like Hero Lab have presented the opportunity to create characters far more quickly and manage characters in game systems and handle a lot of that under the table rules work, which throws people off from some of the crunchier games like Pathfinder, and just play their character. In addition, there are a number of different game systems, from things as simple as Skype to several proprietary systems now that let you run games over the internet. So you don't actually have to have your players all in one location. And that, I think, is going to be one of the big futures, is games that aren't just the people you know gathered around a table, or are the people you know, but are the people you knew 10 years ago who've now spread out throughout the country, all being able to get together and play those games
I have
as
the
they
best,
want.
worst idea. Chat roulette plus roll20.net. This is how you'll assemble your players. I guarantee you'll have an interesting experience. May not be a good one, but it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
I
All
object.
right.
Well, I hear you're one of them indie guys, so no one cares what your opinion is.
Now we're going to throw down.
And in case anyone doesn't know, this is Jim Miller. He's the guy who organized all this craziness. We were just talking, before getting to the next question, about the future of our hobby. Where would you see gaming going in the next 5 years?
The future of our hobby, I firmly believe, is in the indie game. It's in getting rid of stats, getting rid of skill lists, really stripping down games to what it is that we really enjoy about them. I don't, in the last couple of years, I've really gotten into more the indie scene, where there isn't an emphasis on mechanics. There isn't an emphasis on simulation. Most people I know, now there is a segment of people who do enjoy the simulation aspect of it, but most people don't really give a shit. Like, what's the specific difference between X sword and Y armor, right? You know, very few times is that really something that's important in a story. What I found, and this is just, again, anecdotal, is that more people want to do is they want to have the big Lord of the Rings battles. They want something epic and cool. And you can't do epic and cool if you're waiting for your initiative, and you can only do one thing on your turn and then wait. That's boring. That's not cinematic. That doesn't keep your attention. That's why we lose to video games, right? Why would I want to wait 2 hours for a combat after I spent 1 hour making a character to make one move at first level, one attack, and then wait while 6 other people take an hour to do theirs, because we're simulating stuff. I would much rather say, on my turn, I'm going to go in, I'm going to elbow this guy, hack this guy, and then yell at the guy like to challenge him. And in indie games, you have the ability to not focus on the simulation of what would be realistic and focus more on the cinematic. And I think that's the future.
So this may actually segue great into your question. So you started to ask about props, but please restate the question.
It just, do you think it's better to use or not to use? Like, I don't know, like I watched stuff like the DM Scotty and the DM Scrap, you know, all the stuff like that, where they actually utilize cheap stuff to make purchase different systems and different things to use. Do you think players enjoy it more? Do you think it's more cumbersome? A waste of time?
So I'd like to start off by hitting directly the note that I started this session with. It's all about communication. I run a number of different games, and it's really the game that I'm running, the system that I'm running in, and the players that I'm running with, which determines the level of props that I'll provide. when I'm playing a Pathfinder game with a group of people that I've been gaming with for 15 or 20 years, we lay out the map, we put down the props, we have little players, we've got templates that indicate, just like he said, we've got some of that simulation aspect or that wargaming aspect that role-playing games really evolved from, and that gives my characters a sense of involvement and a sense of space that lets them visualize the game more easily. Whereas when I'm running something like Shadowrun, I let it be a little more free-flowing and a little more cinematic. So we don't have a map, but you use the words that you're saying to describe the scene to the players. So it's very personalized to not just the GM, but the players and how much they want to create in their heads versus how much they want to see and be able to react to by seeing it, whether you use props or not. On the other hand, that's for specific mats and stuff. Having props like background music for your game sessions, those I feel are universally good. They create that sense of what you're doing.
Jim, any thoughts you'd like to add?
I think Shadowrun gives you the opportunity to have a really great prop and that you can build a wall with all the D6s that you have just around you in case something attacks you in real life. I used to really love minis, and I still do. Like, I like looking at them. I think they're really cool. I love all the terrain, like the Reaper stuff. Like, every time those bastards put shit up on Kickstarter, I am hurting because I'm like, I want to buy these things, right? Yeah. But in the end, I don't want them. In the end, I don't want them for my game. Like, I appreciate them for what they are. Like, if I want to play a mini game, I'll play a mini game. And there's a lot of really great ones out there. Where's Brendan? Because that bastard is slowly in his podcast convincing me to buy games that I can't afford. But if I want to play a mini game, I'll play a mini game.
Did you learn the secret sign of "Are you a war gamer"?
An empty wallet, you just. But for role-playing games, I find myself less and less wanting that. I've even been trying to. I went really minimalist. So after a while, I used to have minis, and I did all the thing, and I did terrain, and then I got really elaborate, and this is before all the Reaper stuff. So I for a while in the early 2000s, I bought a crap ton of paper minis, like all this paper terrain, and I'd build these really elaborate things. Right? And it's very cool. It's very visual, and there's something sort of evocative about seeing that. But I found that it still was like a board game or a miniatures game, and I've been scaling it back to the point that it was just literally I went back to old school. I just got a mat and a dry erase marker. And then I started going even more minimalist, where it was literally like, okay, there's this space here, and you're going to travel to this space over here. What happens in between? And you just leave blanks. And I'm going even one step further now and abstracting entire dungeons where there is no map, only scenes that I think want to play out, and they only play out if it's a reaction to a character. And I let the characters tell the story. So in terms of using props and things like that, I think they're really cool, but they become a crutch, I think, after a while, because you can only visualize that static miniature hopping, 3 squares, because he moves 15 feet per round, right? And I think that limits the scope of the story that you can tell.
I'm so glad you said that, because now I get to give a counterpoint. So first, I would say it should be based on the GM's convenience. I've actually heard a GM say, well, I don't really have a prop budget and I don't have much stuff, so I feel awkward. No, you shouldn't. Run with whatever you like. And the miniatures should never, or not even miniatures, props, whatever the props are, should never get in the way of running the session. This can include the books. Like, I once brought 3 different monster manuals with me. That was annoying. I don't do that anymore. They got in the way. Same with minis, same with a board. Could even be same with music if I have someone who's not got the best hearing. Maybe I set that aside. But we were saying one of the dangers is that people just see the static pose of the mini. I would say we need to factor in the players' attitudes themselves. I saw this most strikingly with the grade schoolers. In that with adults, I find it works very well if I say, okay, giant bloated maggot thing with a demon riding on top, bile leaking from its 7 mouths. But the kids actually didn't respond as strongly as I thought they would. So I opened up a book and said, here you see the picture of the demon thing with its rider, and they went, oh wow, that's so scary. Oh, I don't want to fight that now. And that with some gamers, they do respond very well to pictures, art, whatever. It doesn't even need to be a mini. It can be as simple as showing them a picture in a book or calling up an image from the internet on your tablet. But those of you who played D&D long ago might remember in the back of a lot of their adventures, they would have show the player these pictures. And even new games like Numenera have done that. And I personally have had a lot of good success just with that moment of, here, this is what it looks like. Then I put the book back and we're just role-playing again. But now some players have a very clear image of, okay, that's the thing. It depends on your group.
One interesting caveat to that also, that is kind of like I'm counteracting my own point, but there is actually one game that you need props, and the more time you spend on them, I found the better it is, and that's Call of Cthulhu. If you spend some time to make really evocative props as clues, you can get some really cool stuff out of that. But I think that's what it fits a theme, and it's very specific to that game, where it's like you're researching things. In a game where your most important stat is library skill, I think maybe props might be a thing that you want to invest in. But short of that, like, yeah.
I think we've covered this one pretty well. So I'd like to ask, Brendan, did I see your hand up earlier? Okay, no, sorry. Does anyone else have a question, concern, issue they're dealing with? Yes, sir. What would you like?
So I run a D20 based game. I've recently come into a situation where suddenly mass combat was thrust upon me because the players like to take things off the rails, which is awesome. I want to encourage that, and I found myself a little bit stuck. I did my best. Do you have any recommendations for how do you run a mass combat that's just kind of ad hoc?
Would you like to start?
Yeah. What does your character do? Tell me what's on screen. I'm a big believer in the story game adage of yes, say yes all the time. Always say yes, never say no. Like, oh, I'm gonna take out your big bad guy that you spent 3 hours like statting. Okay, cool, do it. But tell me a good story while you're doing it. Like, don't just say I hack. Don't push the attack button on your character sheet, right? Yeah, don't push the buttons on there. Like, if you want to cut through 30 orcs at a time, tell me how it happens. I cut this guy, I'm going to jump over this guy, I'm going to take one guy and throw him into another and kick a third. Like, do that. And if you do that, everyone's going to have fun because that character's going to be, everyone in the game, you want to have that really epic fight. You want to have that really just meaty, dramatic thing, right? And with them doing those things, that allows you as a GM to introduce other types of drama besides that, right? So maybe he's in the middle of doing that, but he didn't notice that there's a little girl who's about to get like smashed because he's so busy being the big bad hero. What do? Do you continue being the back hero, or are you going to do? So you open up avenues to other types of drama in the middle of just cutting through hordes of things.
Go ahead. What I would put forth, 2 systems that I found gave useful examples. The first is Legend of the Five Rings. If you haven't played it, it's high fantasy, samurai-esque role-playing. They have a system for mass battles. It doesn't actually focus on how is the mass battle going. It specifically has a chart of where in the battle is your character, what happens to them. And where doesn't mean actual position. It's I'm on the outskirts of the battle, I'm lightly engaged, I'm heavily engaged, I'm at the center of the battle. So that's narrative. And then I forget what you cross-reference on the chart, but then you can pick out interesting opportunities that happen to that character based on their position in the narrative. If you are on the outskirts of the battle, one option could be you see the enemy general with his lieutenant over the crest of a hill. If you are heavily engaged, maybe you need to defend the door to the keep or the enemy is about to break in. In D&D, War of Eternal Darkness module has an excellent system for the battle that, again, abstracts things. With specific moments, rather than have a chart, they've already said, here are some moments in the battle, such as when the spies come in from the sewers, that's a moment. Or when the catapults on the walls are being attacked by invaders with ladders, that's another moment. and the GM just decides, okay, you guys were on the walls, so you're gonna have that moment. No one's watching for spies, so hey, everybody roll me perception. Oh, you notice that there are spies coming in from the harbor. And in this particular system, it added a little mechanism in that I don't ever want to track how the NPCs are rolling. That gets super boring super fast, so I'm never going to keep track of, this side rolled how many hits versus that side. But if you don't want to simply narrate and just say, well, here's the story of the battle as I'm making it up, if you want a little bit of mechanism, War of Eternal Darkness said, each of these encounters is worth battle points. Repelling the sappers is worth 2 battle points. Defending the catapults is worth 3. Very abstract. And then at the end it said, okay, if the PCs have 15 or more battle points, total victory, everyone's safe. If they have 14 to 9 battle points, well, the city's badly hurt, but defended all the way down to 0 to 5 battle points. The city falls and you all retreat. You could use that, or you could make it even more abstract and simply maybe have check marks. How many times did the PCs succeed versus fail in this battle scene? Maybe I'm telling myself, okay, they need to succeed at least 3 scenes. Or maybe I'm just going to read the narrative and see, okay, well, out of those 5 scenes, we had 2 success, 2 and 2 failures, and the mood of the table is saying this, so that's going to focus into how I narrate the end of the battle. Jeff?
I think you guys have covered just about everything. The one addendum to that I would say is, don't make your players spend all the time in the world beating up the first level soldiers. Your players are there because they're the focus of this storyline. So make sure, even if they're in a battle where there are thousands of soldiers on each side, that it's your players who are at the key crutch points of the battle. If they want to roll dice for, 5 or 10 minutes to see how many mooks they kill, great. Have them roll a couple of attacks and say, okay, we extrapolate that out to you killed this many people. But when it becomes time to repel that battering ram, or it becomes time to beat through the first line of defense and get to the archers before they start to rain havoc down on your cavalry, have it be the PCs who are doing those awesome things, unless they explicitly choose, no, I want to keep beating up the mooks. Well, you gave them an opportunity to do stuff. Now give them consequences for choosing not to follow through and do things so that they can feel like they're having an impact on the battle.
Actually, to build off what you just said, a problem I've seen some gaming groups have is when you have, say, 5 combat-capable characters and a 6 who's totally capable but not in the realm of battle. And what I would suggest you consider there comes from the recent Star Wars Edge of the Empire system, which has some great mechanics. This being, let's say, 5 of the party, whether it's modern, fantasy, doesn't matter, are in the battle. They're doing their stuff, being big heroes. You are the diplomat, but you roll initiative too. And, all right, they've all done their turn. It's your initiative. What do you do, Mr. Diplomat, that's awesome? You don't even need to be at the location of that battle. But if he then tells me, oh, I'm doing this awesome diplomacy thing with the representative of the enemy army, oh, cool, here are some bonus dice. Who do you want to give these bonus dice to? Or, wow, you totally have distracted him from his battle plans. That unit that was about to attack isn't attacking for some reason. They haven't received orders. So I can play to this character's strengths outside of actual combat. I think we've hit this one pretty well. Opening up the floor again. Anybody else have any questions, problems their group is dealing with?
This gentleman had his hand up.
Please.
Oh, no, I just, when you were talking about allowing PCs to describe their, like in the mass battle thing, I'd had an experience with that a few games ago, with this PC wanted to do some ridiculous things to the boss monster, and he spent about 3 or 4 minutes just describing what he wanted to do in detail. And the more descriptive it got, it was the more ridiculous and awesome what he wanted to do was. And at that point, I could see in my mind what he needed to roll was getting lower and lower and lower. And at the end of his description, he's like, "This is what I wanted to do." I was like, "You don't even need to roll." I mean, that was brilliant the way you described it. It was terrific. Just like a minor dex. And the other players at the table noticed that. And And so the other players at the table began getting more descriptive as what they were doing. And now, at this point, I'm no longer facilitating the story. You know, I'm sitting back and they're almost telling the entire story themselves. So as each of the players does what they want to do, they became more descriptive. And it allowed the story to tell itself without me doing a whole lot more than walking down the halls. So I think what you were saying was right on the mark. And I think once players start seeing that happen, then all the others will do it. It becomes a more immersive event.
Absolutely.
I might even build on that. Apocalypse World is a very good system for learning to ask questions of the players. So for players who might not automatically be giving you large descriptions of what cool thing their character is doing, you might consider asking the question, how do you do that? It may sound a little silly, but even with a classic D&D, I hit the goblin for 5 damage and kill him. Okay, how do you kill the goblin? And maybe the player just gives you a basic, well, I hit him in the head with my sword. Or that could also be the cue telling them, okay, you have the narrative freedom. You can tell me, what awesome combat maneuver did your grandfather teach you that you're now going to display? It can be for non-combat things, such as, okay, yeah, we were just going to skip over, that 2-day journey through the forest. I pick one player, maybe I pick someone who hasn't gotten to talk as much in the last half hour. Hey, what weird thing did you find in the forest? Or, hey, who did you meet in the forest that almost derailed your trip? And this isn't numerical, this isn't dice. I'm just encouraging them, hey, why don't you fill in some of the gaps here, whether it's to get yourself bonuses for a roll, or just to add some more interesting narrative fluff to something we otherwise would have glossed over.
I think the thing there, though, that to keep in mind is even like you were describing the mass battle system. I think that you said was it something battles?
Legend of the Five Rings?
Yeah, we're not Legend of the Five Rings, where you abstract the battle out. So again, we're seeing where sort of the narrative base is really how to handle role-playing games, letting go of the hard numbers for things and letting just the players tell the type of stories that they want to tell, and then you facilitating them. So like in that example there, where you're talking about, what is that thing in the forest? Yeah, it doesn't have a numerical value. It's just a narrative thing. But I think it's a little bit more than fluff, because they might have described something that inspires you as a GM to circle back around to something that they brought upon themselves. And nobody kills PCs worse than PCs. If you let your players tell you what the worst thing is, that's way better than anything you can think of. And so, when they give you those little pieces of fluff and then you kind of use those later on, like you just kind of catalog them away, and then later on circle back to them and go, hey, remember that lady that you just left in the woods? Yeah, she's really pissed. Like, and this might be 3 or 4 sessions down the road, she comes back and she's not happy. And that just causes a whole nother set of circumstances. So I think it's a little bit more than fluff. I think those are really good opportunities to grow the world that your characters live in.
I see several hands, so I believe it'll be you, sir, then you, and then we'll come back to you.
On building on that, I think that most Apocalypse World-based games that I've seen have at least one move that asks a player to describe the worst thing that could happen and then roll to see if that happens. And most of them, those moves are some of the strongest moves in this one.
Sir.
So, giving narrative to players is a relatively new concept in games. And I've read somewhere about somebody who had given narrative to their player at a con game, and the player just froze, right? And they didn't know what to do, and the whole thing just backfired. If you're playing with a standard group, it's easy to gauge whether or not your friend is going to be able to, accept taking the narrative and not freeze up, not get stage fright, not be embarrassed. Tips for doing that in a public venue?
This kind of ties in with a point I wanted to make, and I wanted to cover that. As a GM, you're not in an adversarial relationship with your players. Everyone is there together to have fun. That is what everyone is working towards. And so it doesn't have to be I have fun by gaining control of the narrative and by telling stuff. So if you have a player who their interest is not in, I describe these amazing things that happen. Their interest is in, I want to be able to do cool stuff, but I don't know how to say it. You start them off. So rather than forcing them to take the entire narrative, you can provide them hooks or introductions. So maybe the last combat that they got into, you've described how the enemies have been attacking, and you give them words that they can then use. So I duck under his arm and I punch him in the ribs, or I aim for this spot right below the eye, which is going to make him hurt. Those kinds of things, giving them the language to use helps. And don't be afraid if you see someone freezing up to assist them. Your job as a GM is to help everybody have fun, including yourself. And so you should be taking the time when a player is not able to react in a way that they want to give them tools to react. Those tools can be the character sheet or the rules. Those tools can be words that they can use to describe what they're doing. Those tools can be throwing away some of the rules because what they described is so awesome.
I'm sorry, but on behalf of the RPG industry, you need to get out. Rules must be followed, otherwise why are we paying money for these books? But on all seriousness, another option to, once again, steal from the best, so Apocalypse World and Dungeon World here, think like a salesman. If I want to sell widgets, why would I offer you one widget when I'll say, oh, you can buy the 10 widget or the 20 widget pack? Let's not talk about the fact that you can buy one widget. So one option could be if I think you might be likely to freeze up as a player, perhaps rather than just say, okay, the battle's started, what are you doing? I might give you two good options. Okay, the trolls are at the gate, but it looks like it's not holding. Do you want to go help them? Or you notice that there are some snipers on the wall, but you've seen some ninjas are climbing up unnoticed. So they're still getting to make a very active choice in the narrative. What part will I play? But we've now given them a finite number of choices, so they might have less analysis paralysis. With younger gamers specifically, I've also found that many kids, not teenagers, but preteens and below, are not used to being given that much authority, that much control of the narrative, because they're kids. You know, mom tells you what to do, dad tells you what to do, the teachers tell you what to do. So they're perhaps giving them a moment, but then having a helpful NPC ready could be very useful. This could be in the form of, okay, you're freezing up, so the captain of the guard says, we must repel the invaders at the drawbridge, come with me. I wouldn't usually give an adult gamer that much direction, but for a kid who's stumbling, I think it can be very appropriate. Jim, anything you'd like to add?
So, because before we get too deep into it, because we kind of keep bringing up some of the same games, has anybody played any of the Apocalypse World games? Dungeon World, a couple of you guys have? Okay, good. So you know what we're talking about. If you haven't, even if you don't play, if you don't like the rule system at all, and there's people who don't, and you're heretics in my eyes.
We
Even
love
if you don't,
all gamers
no, we
here.
Don't. Yeah. No, because I've played Palladium for years, and you don't want to do that to yourself.
Anyway.
Digress. Read Dungeon World, if nothing else, to get really good GM tips. I've told people so I've actually run DCC almost as a Dungeon World game. I just keep some of the tropes of DCC, of Dungeon Crawl Classics in it. Read Dungeon World and kind of wrap your head around the philosophy of getting used to asking questions. And if somebody's really, really freezing up, so the first thing that I do in any Apocalypse World game that I run is I write on an index card, because indie gamers love index cards, I don't know why. I write on the index card, tell me what I see on screen. Like, above all, don't worry about the rules, or just tell me what happens if I'm watching this on a screen, what is going on. And if they freeze at that point, then ask very specific questions that almost lead them down a path, almost leading questions. Like, if they're in the middle of battle and they're like, I don't know what I want to do. Well, how are you going to handle, this kitten now that's in the middle of this battle who's about to get stomped by a bunch of orcs? Like, what do you do? And it's always that turn of what do you do that sometimes puts out a little bit of a pressure, like, I'll go and grab the kitten because I don't want him to die. Excellent. What happens when you do that? Do you shove people out of the way? And sometimes you have to give them some options as far as how, different types of things to do. But it's always asking those questions. What do you do? What does it look like? And I think most people, when I tell them, just describe to me what I see on screen, tell me what I see on screen, that really simple phrase, it clicks in. We're very, everyone watches media, we consume it, we're visual people. So I think that phrase for me is like my magic ticket to everything, because most people understand what I mean by that.
Actually, to build off of that, going back to your question about the player who might be freezing up, involve it on someone else's turn. One of the most frustrating things that I've seen at the table over the years is the player who has a character who's really good at X. They've built this character to do X, and they just roll poorly and their character's about to screw up X. Okay, Jim's about to screw up his roll. I turn to another player. It's not their turn. Hey, he's about to screw up. What are you doing that might help him there? And I might even describe, okay, he's got the arcane tome in his hand, he's trying to cast the spell, but he's just having trouble getting the magical threads to work together. What are you going to do that might help him out? Try to make it a very small, specific question. Maybe even narrow it further, like, he's got imps distracting him from the air, he's got a succubus about to hurl lightning, and the castle's crumbling down. What are you doing? So I'm reminding the player these are the specific elements of the narrative. If they give me anything close to a reasonable answer, okay, Jim, re-roll that check. Now, he gets the fun of, cool, my character who's built to do X might successfully do X, and I've involved that other player. What are you going to do to help him out? So now there's a good feeling of camaraderie and teamwork at the table. And sir, you've been waiting very patiently.
You answered my question with the previous answers.
And
Okay.
I actually did have one piece I wanted to add on to what you're describing. When a player freezes, that is something we want to help them with. But if a character freezes or a character chooses not to do something, don't force them to do things. It can be just as fun for a character in-game to fail at something that they're trying to do as it is to succeed. You wouldn't want to play a game where your character can do everything that they want to do every time, the first time, exactly as they want. Failure and not getting exactly what they're wanting to do as a character is what makes those successes more fun and what gets your players to build into their characters more. So failure should always be an option, but unless you've talked with your players about it ahead of time, and this gets back to communicating about what type of game you're playing, failure should never be final. Just because your character gets knocked down by the trolls who are invading over the bridge doesn't mean that they're out of the battle entirely. They wake up, 3 minutes later as the archers are starting to move into place to take the ramparts and fire down on the rest of your team who are fighting the trolls further down in the city. Now that player has the chance to defeat those archers. Failure is good. Failure as a finality, that player doesn't get to interact anymore, is bad.
Perfect example of that is Big Trouble in Little China. Jack Burton sucks in everything that he does except for his one move at the end, right? Like,
It's all in the reflexes.
it's all in the reflexes. But the whole movie, every time that he goes to charge in, he shoots the gun, he gets it on the head, he boards to the door, and there's a little horde there.
Little secret, he's actually the sidekick
He's
in the
the
movie.
sidekick in the movie. Yeah,
Yes.
it's the other guy who's the main guy. But it's that idea of like, I actually years ago I took that very that movie to heart. The idea of the hero not really being the hero, and so I would deliberately I made a character his thing was he always said like the worst possible thing you can say, like famous last words. He always would say those things. And when I did that, my GM started picking up on the fact that like this guy's trying to get his character killed, and I just wouldn't get him killed. It was just lucky dice for that character, but I was giving the GM like almost like an improv kind of a pillow, right? A little improv throw, like, oh, what's the worst thing that can happen in this dark room? And I'm gonna walk in, and then he would tell me the worst thing that happened because I gave him that sort of thought, and I think training your players to accept failure is a good
So
thing.
there's I'm sorry, do we have a hand up?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, one of the most common kind of like miscommunication, like conflicting playstyle situations that I saw all the time, like playing kind of like D&D characters who introduce failure because it's interesting, and then but that does not fit in with the table style, like the table sort of agreed style of like competence or the way that you're trying to confront whatever the GM's throwing at you. Because they're like, no, that's a suboptimal choice, right? And so somebody feels the need to inject a failure, because an interesting failure to push the story forward, even though the table kind of like consensus is that we should be doing everything as optimally as possible. And I think that was like the first time that I ever saw kind of like conflicting play styles bumping each other. I see that.
And I actually have a mechanic specifically tailored to that conflict that you're mentioning. In order to use this, though, you have to have a conversation with your players. And that is literally stating, I'm not here to kill you, I'm not here to win. Trust me. And you may need to earn that trust as a GM. Conversely, if you've been playing with these people for years, hey guys, we've been playing for years, do you trust me? And establish clearly, I might ask for something weird, but there's a reason for it. Here's the mechanic I've used in the past to great success. Okay, I know that you like occasionally injecting failure, but that's going to freak out a few at the table who are afraid, oh god, now the adventure is going to get worse. So I might offer a trade. Let's pretend I have a bunch of poker chips. These are good for a reroll. Spend a poker chip, you get a reroll. Hell, maybe you spend a poker chip, you get a bonus. Whatever, we could come up with lots of different mechanics, we'll just say reroll. Hey, you just did that awesome thing where you walked into the dark, dangerous room that your character probably shouldn't have. Have a reroll chip.
A benefit, maybe, if you will?
I've heard them called hero points, drama dice.
Do you call them some sort of point that influences your character's fate, maybe?
Yeah.
Yes.
But then the idea is, okay, so now he's in the dark room, he's about to get eaten by a grue, bad stuff is happening, but now the party has a mechanical benefit of that reroll chip. And maybe they have an easy fight and they save that reroll token for later on in the session when they're fighting that class 5 demon that's about to eat them. It's establishing with the player the trust, knowing that if you choose to make things harder for yourself, A, the GM isn't going to just use that to bone you, and B, here have a mechanical reward. People follow incentives. So if I see, wow, Jeff's getting a lot of those reroll tokens because he's describing things in a cool manner, or he's willing to have something unlucky happening, I want some of those, so fine, I'll do something as well. And there's no penalty if you don't describe these things, or if you don't opt to have an unlucky moment. I'm not giving you a penalty, I'm just offering you a carrot. So I think we've definitely beaten this topic pretty well. Specific question to the room. Does anyone have any active challenges, problems, or concerns that their group is facing right now that they would like to throw out to the room for any advice? Yeah. Sir.
Hello, I'm John, and I'm a 12th level Elven Ranger.
Hello, John.
Anyway, I just started in a game of World of Darkness Vampire, and for all I've heard about the system for years, I played like Hunters once at a con, and that was about it. But we have a really great storyteller, a really great group of players. We have this conflict going on in the group, which almost makes me think of like old school Catholics and Protestants bickering over what the Bible says. You have some of the players who have played the game for a long time, and they don't like the fact that we're playing the latest version of World of Darkness Vampire. You have other players in the GM who are kind of like, well, get with the program. And of course, you know, I've read over the books quite a bit, though I haven't really played the game before. But I thought some of the neat concepts from the older editions of the game were like generations and the various chapters, and of course were clans, and the various clans have been changed and kind of abbreviated from the earlier games. But anyway, this, you know, it's like every 5 minutes, it's like, oh, but, you know, in the old editions of the game, we did it this way, and I don't like this. And so how do you deal with that?
Jeff, would you like to start?
Sure, I'll start, and we're back to my favorite word, and that's communication. So ideally, in that kind of situation, not during that current gaming session, because the storyteller should be trying to keep the game on track during that specific session. But after that session, the players who are not enjoying the way that the game and the rules and the mechanics are playing out, and the storyteller should meet and talk. And the storyteller needs to ask probing questions. It should not be, well, hey, you guys hated this and this and this, and you want us to move back to this previous edition. It should be, what did you enjoy about the previous edition? What made it evocative? What made it fun? What brought more to your characters? And find those nuggets, things that you personally talked about, generations and the better striation of the various clans and how each of them gave uniqueness. And then look for a couple of those elements that don't create a ton of rules overhead for the new players, and then talk to the new players about those specific elements to pull into the game. So look for specific things that the old players enjoyed and aren't getting out of their story, and work on bringing those elements into the story without having to overhaul entirely the rules system that's happening now. But again, it's all about communication, and it's all about talking to the players and finding out specifics of why they're not enjoying the game as much as they could.
And you can have my 2nd edition Star Wars West End games when you pry up my cold dead hands.
Or the original 7th Sea.
Jeff pretty much said everything I want to say, so I'll just give a slight tangent, which is that occasionally a gaming group needs a breather. If you're a White Wolf group that's been playing White Wolf for the last 3 years, there can be a benefit to that breath of fresh air of, hey, we're going to play Mouse Guard for 2 months. We're going to play Fiasco for 1 night. We're going to play D&D 5th edition for as long as it takes to do this one particular adventure, and sort of give everyone that breath of fresh air. Maybe it clears the air. Okay, when we come back to White Wolf, maybe I'm a little calmer, or maybe I've seen, well, I really like that mechanic in 5th ed. Maybe we can bring that in here. And it just gives them that reset button of, what do I actually care about versus what's just the argument rut that I'm stuck in.
Yeah, in terms of this particular group though, the storyteller who's really good at what he does, we're brand new basically. He put up an ad in meetup.com, and so he attracted various players, some who in the past, in their own different groups, have played this particular game for years, others like me who are pretty new to it. And so we kind of have the new group problems rather than the old group problems.
And that, I would argue, can also be seen as a question of etiquette. And what is the etiquette of the table? And an established group will have its own etiquette. One table, we cuss at each other, we make off-color jokes. The next table, we keep it more PG. Each group gets to set that for itself. With a new group...
And then there's my table. It just gets horrible really quick.
Does it work for you and your friends, though?
Yeah, because my friends are all foul-mouthed, just like I am. Just really lowbrow. So.
Horrible birds of a feather.
Yes, but it works. And it, sometimes that happens, though, and that's really tough because I think this hobby lends itself to nostalgia and becoming a grognard eventually, right? Where you're like, this is my edition. And there's always this sort of edition wars.
But
it's tough to beat that sometimes.
While I generally want to be very inclusive and make space at my table for everyone, it's not a bad thing to be a little exclusionary for consciously chosen reasons. If I make a meetup event and I say, I am running World of Darkness, Werewolf the Apocalypse, I am running a very specific game. I might even say we're using 3rd edition rules. Okay, if you come to my table and say, well, Ben, I love Werewolf the Forsaken, that's cool. I have no beef with Werewolf the Forsaken. That's not what I'm running today. If you want to play Forsaken, maybe we can come back in a few months and play that. But I've put out this feeler for Apocalypse. I have no problem if you say, sorry, Ben, I love gaming with you. You're a good storyteller, but I just don't like Apocalypse. No harm, no foul, man. Come back another time, we'll play some other game. I'm going to run for a few months with this particular system. Maybe the GM does need to say, well, if 5 of the players really love Vampire Requiem, and 1 player just really wants to be playing Old School Masquerade, that's cool. Tell you what, maybe I'll run Requiem for 5 months, story's over, would you like to then run some masquerade? And allow them to say no. Not every gamer is always a fit for every group. And while I don't want you to say, if you're not playing this edition, get the hell out of my table, it is not wrong to say, I am here to run this game, period. If you are really not interested in playing this game, I'm sorry, this may not be the table for you today. We can still be friends and play some other games.
I like to call that the nuclear option. It's something that you should always have in your back pocket, and you should be willing to use it when you have to, but it's generally not the first thing that I go to. The first thing you go to is diplomacy, is your communication, you're trying to get things, but you should never be afraid to say, yeah, that isn't a fit for what we're doing here. As Ben said earlier, all tables have an etiquette, and that etiquette isn't just, how foul-mouthed are we, how dark are we willing to let the game get. It's also, what rules do we have for who orders food, or what rules do we have for just the game that we're going to play? All of those encompassed together become the etiquette of the table, and you should always be willing to set that etiquette and don't feel like you have to compromise yourself in order to allow everyone to play at your table.
Sir.
And you should discuss those things before the campaign begins.
Yes.
Something I've actually seen some GMs do, not everyone, is they'll actually put out, this is more if you're opening an invite, say on meetup.com or you're at a convention, not as much with your home group, but maybe say, here's my rating system on a 1 to 5 scale. I'm a 3 darkness, 5 violence, 4 adult themes, 2 comedy, 2 romance. And just tell people, like, this is what to expect if you play at my table. Especially with newer gamers, if they've never heard of, say, Call of Cthulhu before and all they've played is D&D, it might even be helpful to say, this is Call of Cthulhu, a horror game where the PCs are much weaker than the terrifying monsters they oppose. Just so someone doesn't sit down thinking, oh, Call of Cthulhu, I can punch him in the face, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Did you want that hand back?
Alternatively, with an established group, I've only done this once, results may vary, I've seen people put out a vote to the table. Here, everybody have a card, here are your categories. Romance, intrigue, combat, drama, mystery, etc. And 1 to 5, how much do you want the thing? And let everyone put down, this is the kind of game I want. This is dangerous because you need to then be willing to be flexible. If everyone says, I want a really high intrigue game, and you were looking for a very action-focused game, well, we're going to need to be flexible. But it also allows you to tailor it. If I see that Jeff is the only one who put comedy, this is not a comedic game, but I'm going to make sure that some funny stuff happens to Jeff's character. If I only saw one player put down romance, okay, this is not a romance game, but I'm going to work with them to say, what kind of a side plot would you like to have where romance shows up for your character? But everyone has a general idea, okay, this is an intrigue and action game with a little comedy side plot, a little romance side plot.
So we had a hand over
All
here.
right, so I'm running 3 to 5 games a week.
Holy crap.
And I'm
Would you describe yourself as a masochist or glutton for punishment, sir?
There's a manual.
Or do you run for Pathfinder Society?
I'm the East Valley local coordinator for D&D.
Okay.
So I'm doing this for a living. And it's working.
Nice.
So, you guys have got some great insights on GMing stuff. I haven't heard of this dungeon thing.
Oh, you're missing out.
We'll happily tell you all about it afterwards.
I just got back to the States. But what I'm noticing in my players that's really, it's becoming difficult for me to work with. All right, so we've been doing this, yeah, okay. We've been doing this for 30 years, right, this group here. And it's a predictable game. I know when my turn is going to be. What do you do when you've got a group of players that, it goes from player A's turn to player B's turn, and they sit there and they're not prepared for their turn. It's difficult for me to understand how, in a combat round, you can, 2, 4, 6, 8. It's been 7 minutes, 8 minutes, since your turn. How are you not prepared for your turn? How do you deal with, With Warrior, you've had 10 minutes to figure out what you're going to do. How are you sitting here, screwing around with your book?
That's an excellent question. Just to let everyone know, we're going to answer this. Then we're almost out of time, so I'm afraid that's going to have to be our last question for today. We're going to give you some closing thoughts, and then we're going to wrap it up for now so everyone can have time to get some dinner before their evening games. Jeff, how would you respond to that question?
So it's very variable, but if it happens consistently, then don't be afraid to have the character freeze up. If it's, the 5th or the 6th combat that this has happened with for that player, let your players know at the beginning of that night's session, hey, we're going to run combat a little differently tonight. If you don't know what you're going to do within 30 seconds of it getting to your turn, because remember, in combat, most of these systems, combat every round is 6 seconds. So if you don't know within 30 seconds what your character was doing in 6 seconds of time, you froze up for that round and you lose that round. Or if they're really high level players and they can do a bunch of stuff during a round, you froze up for the round, so you missed those first 2 things that you'd normally be able to do. And you can make it a punishment for players that it happens with consistently. If it's a new game and you're trying to incentivize players, as Ben said, people who are ready on time, you can give them that carrot. So people who know immediately what they're going to do, maybe they get a +1 or a +2 to whatever neat thing they were trying to do. Or they get a little luck token that says, hey, the next time I try to do something, I'm gonna be a little better at it. So they were prepared, they were ready. They can dodge that blow that's coming at them because they were thinking about it. But somebody who wasn't paying attention, well, they didn't have time to ready their shield, so that blow slips right over it. You can do either the carrot, and I generally do the carrot for players who aren't causing problems a lot, or you can do the stick if they're consistently causing problems, and you can punish them a little so that they start to pay attention.
Jim, your thoughts?
So I do a couple things when that happens. If I think that, because you can kind of tell, as you're going around the table, you can kind of tell if that one person isn't focusing or they're going to take a while. So I start doing subtle things, like I start speeding up my speech, or I get louder or get softer so they have to pay attention to me. And then if they do hesitate in that moment, I do something similar where instead of necessarily a stick, I try and add a complication that makes things worse for them, but not like punching them in the face constantly. Now you've noticed that you've fallen behind. The rest of your parties, now you're alone all of a sudden. So just kind of keep building on things to sort of make their situation worse, but not in a way that is like you're outright killing them, right? You're just narratively making their lives more interesting. And I'm a big fan of letting people sort of hang themselves that way. Just kind of keep doing it, and it's gonna get worse and worse and worse. And next thing you know, then you're gonna start taking damage, and you're not gonna make it, or put them in situations that they just cannot get out of. That's what I do.
I might consider talk with the player outside of game and just let them know, hey, this is a thing that I've noticed happening. Could we work on this? Because they may not be aware. Second, if they have a complex character sheet or they have abilities they themselves don't understand, hey, let's work together to make you a cheat sheet, or let's print out what your spells do, or let's have a flashcard that shows you what to do so that you don't have to waste time next session thumbing through your book. Or finally, if you think the player would respond well to it, give them 2 choices and that's it. Okay, you've frozen up. Well, you can either attack those trolls or you can run to the bridge and pull her character to safety. 2 choices, decide now. Yes, I realize this is taking some of the freedom away from the players, but it's also less punishing than just, too bad, you stood there for a round, turn's over, moving on to the next player. So, we are just about out of time, so I'm going to ask for some closing thoughts. What would you like our audience to take away for their next couple of gaming sessions, be it as players, as GMs, or whatever? Jim, what would you like them to take away?
Go outside of your comfort zone. One of the reasons why I wanted to put this event together was to create a space where people can meet each other, and I built times in there so people can mingle. But it was also to, bring in people and hopefully expose them to games that they haven't tried before, because I think we live in a really unique moment where it's sort of a golden age of renaissance, almost a golden renaissance, if you will, of role-playing. There's specific games that do specific things very well. And even if it's not your cup of tea, try some of those games out, because you might find something in there that you can bring back to your game and add it just a little more flavor to it, just make it a little bit better. Try something different, try a game that you've never heard of, try a game in a genre that you don't think you'd even like. And you might be surprised, you might find something that you really like. One of my favorite games that I've played last year was a game where you have to play a female Russian pilot in World War II. It's very specific. And it was one of the best games that I've played in years.
Night Witches, yes.
Night Witches, yeah. It's a beautiful game. And from that, I learned to take drama and narrative and take an interest in people's lives and add that to like killing monsters and taking their stuff. Like, that's golden to me. So try something different. Try a game you're not used to.
Jeff, your last thoughts?
My last thought would be, everyone is there to have fun, but don't be afraid of causing failures, which result in more fun. So you as a GM shouldn't feel like you have to run exactly everything that your players want. You are there to have fun yourself. And if you aren't having fun during the sessions that you're running, well, eventually you're just going to stop running entirely. So it's better to tweak things and make sure that you have a little fun with what's happening as well. And as I said, failure isn't final. Failure is just another spot to spring success from. So just because you didn't get that perfect doesn't mean you can't do awesome things and get something else perfect later.
There is a concept I've come across called messy hospitality. Many people are afraid to host a dinner or a party if their house is a little too messy, or their tablecloth is stained, or they just haven't had time to vacuum. And yes, by all means, keep a clean house, vacuum every so often, but your friends want to hang out with you. If the tablecloth's messy, if maybe you don't have the soda you want in the fridge and you're just doing a pizza night, it's still better to have that good night with friends, enjoying each other's company, than to have said, nah, don't come over tonight, we'll do this next week. Because eventually there are too many next weeks and not enough good game nights. This applies directly to GMing. We've talked about a lot of great concepts, and there's a lot to juggle. And if you try to put every single good idea into practice, you're gonna be a little overwhelmed. Rather than be overwhelmed, remember that even if you don't have everything right for the session, maybe not every NPC's statted, hell, maybe you don't even know the second half of the plot for tonight, you only know the first half. Generally, I'd say it's better to have that session, have your friends over, have a good time, even if you need to say, sorry guys, I need to call this at a 2-hour mark instead of 3, or I don't have that ready, so can you give me a 20-minute break mid-session? Because then at least you're together, you're gonna have a good time, and you can always come back to it later on. So this has been The Art of the Table. Thank you all for coming and sharing your thoughts and ideas with us. I hope you guys have a great time during the rest of Crit Hit.
Thank you.